Welcome. In today's podcast, the politics teacher and his students discuss, has the tide turned? I'm joined today, as ever, by Carter Fenwick, Liam Ed, and Piara Power. There's been many spectacular by-election results over many decades. I can't remember seeing one quite like this before. In terms of the change of vote, it is literally enormous. And some would say that British politics is being turned completely upside down in the way that voters are now behaving. So the Greens took, just to remind you, the Greens took the by-election constituency of Gorton and Denton, a traditional Labour stronghold, in quite spectacular fashion, and was seconded by Reform. Never seen anything like that. Is this something that is a temporary phenomenon, or is it something that is an indication of a change that is happening to our politics that is going to radically alter the way in which politics develops in the future? Just kicking it off, how significant do you think the Gorton and Denton by-election result was?
Well, Ian, I personally think that it was very, very significant. Whether it's as significant as you think it is over the span of time, I don't know. But for now, in the middle of this government that has lost a seat that I think was in its top 30 target seats, right? And lost it to the left, effectively, to a Green Party that developed a coalition of white working class voters and minority voters that include a large Muslim population, include more recent migrants from places like Africa. It's pretty significant. And I think for me, it's significant because the Greens have shown the sort of coalition, for want of a better word, that you can bring together to get people's votes, and done it with a local candidate who's very dynamic, very charismatic. And I suppose we can't really avoid the fact that Labour have walked into this, shot themselves into the foot, and every other cliche I can think of in terms of how they've messed it up. This was a seat that Andy Burnham should have been representing them in, but the leadership got scared. They don't want him challenging Starmer, and so he wasn't the candidate. Someone who clearly didn't have the appeal that he would have, and then together with the fact that the Greens have played an amazing game means that it's pretty significant for now, at least. And yes, I guess it's significant also because the Greens have never won a by-election, right? The candidate was a councillor on Manchester Council, and I think had stood in previous by-elections in the city, but never got anywhere. So yeah, so in short, I'm not sure I'm going to give it the space that you're giving it, but it's a big one. It's a really big one, and tells us about the way in which domestic politics are going, with the Greens and Reform ahead of Labour, the Tories losing their deposit, and you take from that and extrapolate it out to a national picture what you can.
And that's replicated at the moment in the latest polls, isn't it? With, for the first time in terms of our politics, the Greens and Reform in the top two positions, and Conservatives and Labour in third and fourth place, respectively.
Yeah, but both of them are on. Well, the last tracker that we've seen is both of them are on 23%, which is very low, but puts them ahead. The Labour Party and the Tories are at 16 each, so pretty fatal. If you were to take this as a snapshot of what the country thinks and what might happen in the future, but also really interesting because this is probably the highest that the Greens have ever had in a national poll, right?
Yeah, and I mean also the demise, if you like, in support for Labour and Conservatives, I was saying a long way back, I suppose, but they did reach between 80 and 90% consistently. If you went back in time, that fell away in more recent elections to around 70%. But now a combined level of support of 32% is a pretty spectacular fall. And equally a spectacular rise in other parties. Well, what's your thoughts on it, Leah?
Well, I think this election was really interesting because, I mean, it showed that the two-party system is pretty much finished. I mean, you look at Gorton and Denton, it's a weird constituency. It's made up of Manchester and Tameside. The Manchester side was voting for Labour and the Greens the most, and the side was voting for Reform. So you can see Gorton and Denton is sort of split up in the sort of same way that the country is, because I wouldn't say the Conservative Party is as relevant as it used to be. I think this election has been a big scare for Labour. I think Labour has positioned itself for this election, and I suppose for how it's going to position itself for the next general election, is that they're the anti-reform vote. You know, I feel like they've gotten comfortable with the fact that if they can say, "Oh, well, vote for us because we're not reform," well, that's just not a good enough reason anymore to vote for a party, and it's been proven in this election. People do want a different sort of governing, and they don't want Labour anymore. And so that's why the Greens were voted in. I think it's also interesting because, you know, if we're going to call it anti-reform votes and pile in Green and the Labour Party together, they got over 60% of the votes, and Reform didn't even get 30. So it makes me a little bit more hopeful. But I understand that, you know, it is one constituency; it doesn't represent the country. I think it's massive for the Greens, huge for the Greens. It's their first big win in the North, I believe. The Greens have had quite a hard time breaking through to the North. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think if I got into that, it would take up the entire podcast. So I'm not going to. But yeah, I think
it's showing a spread really now that they're reaching now places where they would not have imagined before that they would get that level of popular support.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, people aren't seeing a vote for Greens as a wasted vote anymore. The same way people aren't seeing a vote for Reform as a wasted vote anymore. In terms of they don't necessarily vote for the Tories anymore. Um, I've seen a lot of predictions for the next general election after this by-election. It's a very colourful map, very colourful. It's a rainbow. It's a lot different to what I'm used to seeing throughout my life, and I imagine a lot different to what you two are used to seeing as well. But yeah,
Don't knock us together.
yeah, it's monumental in British politics. It's um, it's it's the biggest change I've seen in my lifetime. I'm not too sure about you two.
You know, the interesting thing though is that will the Greens really have the reach that Reform have around parts of the country, right? Basically, what we've seen is Tory voters just decamping to Reform. Will as many proportionately Labour voters just decamp to the Greens? And what's the spread of that? Because traditionally Labour wins the cities, wins some working class areas, but the Tories pick up the shires and everything else. Now, the Tories have lost it, but they could still re-emerge. And of course, there's always the possibility of coalitions forming. But I don't know whether the Greens on their own would pick up places like Sheffield, say, for example. They've had a Green Council, but just off the top of my head, as a place I go to quite a lot. I'm not sure whether they pick up or depose the kind of Labour MP that I've got here in Hackney in East London, whereas Reform could depose any Tory anywhere. That's the difference, isn't it? So I guess in order, speaking as a progressive, you'd need really some kind of a green-red coalition to keep power as it stands amongst the left. Otherwise, I think the Greens wouldn't perform, from what I see, instinctively, wouldn't perform in a way that could challenge Reform in a general election.
Yeah, I think Green have a lot of work to do in terms of connecting with the working class and working class constituencies, especially places like where I'm from, Hull, that's predicted to vote reform. We've got a reform mayor. Um, they do tend to struggle to connect to the working class, even though a lot of their policies benefit them. I think that's because of a lot of leftist elitism and just a general disconnect with the public. When you've got reform coming in saying they're champions of the working class, it's kind of hard to fight that. But it'll be interesting to see where they go from here.
Yeah. And looking at Ian's face, I'm not sure our listeners can see it, but his face shows you where it leaves the Lib Dems, right? Absolutely nowhere, in the middle somewhere, floating.
Would wouldn't be particularly
Playing
interesting
the
either
long
way.
game, Ian. We'll win. I'm
Carter,
sure we will.
Carter, we're waiting with bated breath on your view of what's happened and how significant you think it is.
My view of the by-election, I didn't know happened until 2 days after it finished. Uh, I've been ill. That's my excuse. So, I mean, yeah, in terms of the shattering of the two-party system, the by-election is very. I think it itself. I don't think it's very significant. In the end, it's just a by-election, but it is indicative of potential trends going into the next few years. It'll be interesting to see if parties like Greens and Reform can keep this momentum going all the way up to 2029, which is when and we are scheduled to have our next general election, unless there's like a snap election called or anything before then. It's interesting to see how the other two sort of more center, or the other three more center parties respond to this. How will the Tories respond? How will Labour respond? How will the Lib Dems respond? Because right now, what was seen as our three sort of our two major and then our one runner-up party, they've they've kind of fallen off. Yeah, in the past, I've talked about how I've been seeing a lot of Lib Dem marketing, and it's very impressive in my eyes. I haven't been anymore. So I think going into the next few by-elections and leading up to the general election in 2029, it'll be interesting to see how the other three parties that have sort of been left in the dust are able to catch up, and will they respond to the onslaught of push sort of from the Greens and Reform.
One of the things, Ian, that I think probably in our opening comments we haven't really addressed is that there's this question of whether this is a crisis or not for the ruling party, the Labour Party, and I think it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think their response to it has been particularly useful or thought out. On the one hand, you have a cabinet minister saying the winner's speech in Gorton was what she might have given if she'd won the by-election. On the other hand, you've got the party machine, including Starmer, I think, I'm not sure, saying that they are extremists. The Greens are extremists. So what are you supposed to like gather from that, right? What's just as usual, no strategy, no focus, no sense of we've got this in hand. Really, what they should have said is, yeah, we get it, we see it. We're going to take the message back from this. Good luck to the Greens. We know you're there pushing at us, and we think we can still deliver for the British people. That would have been the script, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the scaremongering there, the extremist allegation. You've got then the right wing media. I think the Mail had a headline "Green Scare," and meanwhile, the the public may be thinking, well, the two main parties are losing the plot a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really good representation of how Labour are actually just slowly destroying themselves because I do believe that if they'd have had Andy Burnham running as their MP, then they would have won the by-election. But because Starmer's scared of him and he knows he's coming for his job, he decided to put himself, I guess, before the Labour Party. And it's not worked out well for him. So I think Labour are in absolute shambles. It's been absolutely catastrophic for them. I don't see much for recovery. And I think if they are going to recover, they need to stop pandering to the right wing votes because they're not getting them in any way, shape, or form. And now they're losing the left. So they really need to have a rethink about who they are in Parliament for.
Yeah, and with the May elections and having to U-turn on the cancellation of those elections, that could really be terminal for Starmer.
I think
Absolutely.
it will be, yeah. I imagine all those Labour MPs are watching this and have already been through one false kind of scenario with Burnham standing, being given the opportunity in this seat. We'll just be waiting till after that. After that, what will be a massacre, right? I mean, I'm not sure whether the Greens are putting candidates up in every constituency and every council, but reform will be.
Yeah.
And it will be a massacre one way or another, won't it? And then that will be the moment of reckoning. I think people will say it's kind of like a midterm. Let's now make the big change, and the big change will be to start to undermine Starmer, probably to get rid of him. I would guess, right? Who's going to take over? We don't know. We're not full of optimism. If you're a progressive, it should be Andy Burnham, but how's he going to do that without having a seat?
Yeah, I will also say, it's terrible timing for the Labour Party too, because once again, the Labour Party have got in and just joined in on another illegal war in the Middle East. I mean, there's just they're getting shots left, right, and centre. They're just they're absolutely. I don't see them recovering in any way, shape, or form.
It's funny. I've
Although,
got a different take on that, but that's for another pod, probably, isn't it?
Just tradition now for Labour prime ministers to start wars in the Middle East. Blair did
Yeah.
it.
although Trump obviously had a go at them being not as supportive as they could be, but anyway, what do you think has driven the result, and what's driving British politics at the moment? The change, would you say? What are the big reasons for this shift in our politics?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same reasons I was sort of going through in our video on Restore. It's people being unhappy with our current government. It's economic price crisis. It's people living in poverty. It's people that are desperate and looking at different options and then choosing those different options. Because, time and time again, over the last however many years, we've been shown that the Conservatives and Labour don't act in our interest. So people just simply aren't voting for them anymore.
And do you think we're seeing the collapse of the centre then? Are we seeing polarisation left and right?
Um, I mean, yes, but also no. It's it's weird because I feel like we've had such a shift in politics. I mean, Labour traditionally left wing. I feel like they've shifted much more to the centre. I mean, our current government, I'd say, is a centre government, but then I do suppose people are tending to vote more like extreme now. So I do think people aren't exactly going to settle for just carrying on the same status quo. So I guess yeah, there is a abandonment of centre politics.
I can't.
What's your what's
I'm,
your
I'm
thought, Piara?
I'm not sure anyone would say that there's been a leftist Labour government in a very long time. But what's happening here is clear, isn't it? That Labour came in, promised change, promised to listen to people. People were pretty disgusted with what the Tories had done, the way they were running the government. And they just haven't been able to carry it. They just haven't been able to sell some of the good things they're doing, and there are good things. They just haven't been able to win battles that the populists are putting up. They haven't been able to express any kind of vision for the future. I mean, charisma, lack of charisma is absolutely fatal to, I think, to any government, for these guys in particular, particularly a government that's doing detailed stuff that is not always immediately obvious, and fighting against things that are against world affairs, a far right government in the US, the populist appeals around the world, the challenge of AI and new tech. You need to be quite straightforward in your thinking and in the way you express things, and they just haven't been really. Despite the fact that I still think they're doing some interesting stuff, and I would never ever want to go back to a right wing government. Really, that we've had enough of that.
And
I
I mean, in
think
terms of the way that the electorate are seeing things, and especially let's think about younger people. How do you think that they're changing in terms of their values? You know, that they're not connecting at the moment, seemingly, with Labour values or with Conservative values. So, what are they connecting with? People and maybe younger voters. That, if we look into the future, what do you think is the way that things are developing there?
well, I think it is sort of less of a collapse of the center and more of a rise in sort of populist ideas. You know, we've come off a 15-year deeply unpopular Tory government, and we're now into a 2-year deeply even more unpopular Labour government, if you ask me. So these far left and far right parties, such as Reform Greens, they are coming up from the sides and offering these sort of simple solutions like, hey, you don't like the government now, I can do something to change that. And we're seeing this popular sentiment growing, especially in the right, with parties such as Restore, Advance, Bruv, so on. These sort of smaller splinter parties that are all following the same playbook that Reform have been building for the past 2 odd years. You know, simple promises like mass deportations, like, like lower taxes, like so on. It's sort of, when you look at history, probably not a very good example, but the only example I can think of, back in Weimar Germany, the deeply unpopular Weimar government was eventually usurped by the populist National Socialist Party, led by the most infamous Austrian painter in history,
And
who
I mean,
basically
there
promised,
the
yeah, his
sorry.
simple promises were work and bread originally, and then he got very Nazi and he kind of Hitlered all over the place. But no, his simple promise to begin with was work and bread, and we're sort of, I don't want to try and compare Reform to the Nazis specifically, because I don't think they're that bad. But we are seeing a sort of similar rise in populism where simple promises are enough to pull in large swaths of the vote, just because our government is deeply unpopular and the other mainstream options are lackluster.
So the
Yeah,
mainstream has lost its appeal, and the populist parties are feeding off the dissatisfaction and also the economic problems that have been, really quite prevalent. I interrupted you. Sorry, Piara.
well, I was going to ask your view, really. Well, you've been watching this stuff quite intensely for a long time. What do you think's going on? Because I guess in the heyday of the SDP, which I'm sure would have got your vote back in the day, that was the big disruption, wasn't it, in terms of electoral politics? And then they morphed into the Lib Dems. But we haven't seen this sort of two-pronged disruption with a wider kind of, sort of disruption to the liberal order. I haven't seen that ever, I don't think.
I think we're seeing a collapse at the moment in the centre, and a growing sense of alienation and despair from many people who feel that they've been very, very badly let down by this government, that they were deeply dissatisfied with the Conservative government, in terms of not just its economic record, but the way in which it conducted itself, that the trust and level of faith in our mainstream politics has collapsed. The social media and the effectiveness of the marketing, which, let's face it, has been very effective by the parties on the right, but by the Green Party, and the kind of sloganizing, sometimes not supported by the most well thought out policies, is gathering traction. And you can understand why, because people think you've had your chance, In fact, you've not just had your chance over the last few years, you've had your chance over the last few decades. And you keep letting us down. So I get it. I understand why people would say, well, as I think you said before, anything is better than what we've got. The problem is what might be seemingly better, if it's based on populist sloganizing and ill thought out policies, may make it worse. But yeah, I think we're in a very we're in a perilous state, really, because the whole uh, kind of order is now being kind of questioned, and that has I can't predict. I don't think any decent political commentator could predict the consequences, other than to say that things are really in a radically different position, and we don't know where it's going to take us.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's more than a question of interest. I'm relieved actually, because we all know the flaws of this Labour government. We know the things they're not doing right, and now to see that there is a left alternative that then also can challenge reform. They've got a lot to do that, but could possibly challenge reform is interesting. Because this morning, a family member has just sent me a tweet from a political editor in this country, reporting on a poll this morning, in which more than half of Reform members believe non-white British citizens from abroad should be deported or encouraged to leave. Now that we know, right? More than half of them think that. But then 20% also believe non-white citizens whose parents were born in the UK should be forcibly removed. So that's my daughter, 3 generations in, would be forcibly removed, according to 20% of Reform members. I mean, that's ridiculous, really. I mean, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to send people to when you're going to deport them from their own country? So, given that that's the mainstream view of Reform members, I don't want them anywhere near a government. So, in that sense, as an oppositional force, I'm pleased that the leftist populists have made a gain finally.
And Restore would go further than that. Restore would go even further than that. So they're even further to the right of a party that's to the right of a right-wing Conservative party. And really, I think that, when we talk about the political future, the commitment to a country that has tolerance and diversity, is committed to the equalities and anti-discrimination of all groups, the commitment to multiculturalism, the commitment to liberal democratic values, all of that at
Commitment
the
to women's
moment,
rights, the commitment
the
to
rule of
women's
law,
right to choose, the rule of
yeah,
law, it
all
all
of that,
follows.
all of that is being challenged. All of that is being challenged. And, in our last podcast, we conveyed our commitment to those values, and absolute commitment, because they're in peril. I really do believe that. When we talk about what is at stake here, you only need to look at what's happening in America at the moment to see what's at stake. The political consensus in America has been broken, and the respect for the rule of law, for the courts, for the exercise of democratic rights is being stripped away, and that is a huge concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad to see just the state of the country today, and the amount of extremism we see from, all angles. I mean, the thing is, I am a person that does think Britain is under threat and we are losing our Britishness, but not in the way of immigrants, in the way of America. I feel like we used to be a country that really cared for one another. I mean, especially after the war, like, and the installation of the NHS. I feel like we have lost a lot of our British values, but our British values was loving thy neighbour. You know, we you have grandparents that used to nip round to the neighbours to borrow sugar, and even in World War Two, people moan about Antifa. Well, every single one of our World War Two veterans and everyone that lost their life in World War Two was Antifa inherently because they was literally fighting fascists. I mean, I just feel like we have been so wrapped up into Americanisms and into American culture and into fighting each other. I mean, we used to laugh at how polarized America was, and then look at us now. It's devastating to me, and I'm only 20. I've only seen 20 years of this. I mean, I can't imagine how much it's going to change in the future.
I mean, really, when we come back to what we've talked about before, and I think that it was Piara that talked about what is it that we want to see in terms of the political future. Well, we do want to see honesty. We haven't had much of that. We do want to see trust. And we do want to see national renewal that's based on the kind of values that we've talked about, because we're passionate about those. And I do think when we talked about the country and what it stands for, I do naively or optimistically, I do still have faith in the British people that there is a majority that support those values. But it's like with everything, you have to stand up for them. You can't just think that they're going to be there forever. They're not going to be. We do need people to really stand up for those values, because they could easily be lost. Coming back to a final kind of question about this all, we haven't really talked about, and it's difficult, isn't it, the young perspective, but Carter and Leah, how do you think young people are viewing our politics at the moment? Do you think that they're viewing it in a more hopeful way, or do you think that they are rather fearful about how our politics is? I know they're quite extreme positions, but what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, depends who you ask. We're not, we're not all a hive mind.
No, of course. So how
I
do
We
you
don't
see it then?
represent all young
How do you see
people.
it then, Leah, and Carter? Are
well,
you more hopeful or more fearful?
well, I'm more hopeful because I myself am a socialist and I'd like to see a rise in supporting socialist policies. But, I can't speak for everyone.
No.
I'm sure Carter absolutely hates the fact that Greens are getting more votes. And I'll let you talk about that because
So Carter, the floor is yours. How are you seeing things at the moment?
I'm actually hopeful, the subversion of expectations. By the day, it looks like there's a better chance of Starmer getting chucked out, and I'm hopeful for that. I'd rather it be almost anyone but the Greens, because I think they'll end up trying to make me eat the bugs, and I won't do that.
You know
But
what? It's taken record time for you to do your Starmer rant.
Mm.
I hate that man. I hate that man. I hate him.
But you haven't said anything about your alleged affiliations to the Lib Dems.
I
Sorry,
answer them.
choking on my
I
words.
answer.
I thought you were a Lib
I,
Dem, and they got wiped out, lost their deposit, didn't they? Or did they even bother standing?
I don't know. I'm
Tell us who
I
you
align with the
really
Lib
follow.
Dems
Come on,
because they're the one
tell us who
party I
you
don't
really
hate.
want. Tell us who you really will be voting for.
Well, in the general election, I think I'll be voting for the Yorkshire Independence Party personally, because at this
yeah,
point, I just want out of the UK. I've had enough.
Do we have a Fredo moment of the week, anyone?
Um, yeah, we do. I mean, as I feel like I've talked about a lot, I'm doing my dissertation at the moment. It's driving me a bit insane, but I've been spending a lot of time in a cafe local to me and sitting and using the charging ports and writing on my laptop. And I get an oat latte, which I already have to pay more for because I can't have cow's milk. It doesn't agree with me. But I pay £4.85 for one oat latte in Yorkshire. It's disgusting. I'm from Hull. I've moved to a different part of Yorkshire and I'm paying London prices. It's not on.
Even in London, it doesn't cost that much.
I know. It's ridiculous, but it's the only place I can find with a Wi-Fi connection and a charging port, so I'm stuck there.
I've got kind of like a reverse Freddo though. I
Go on
went to a
then.
chip shop the other day and they had half portions of chips. First time I've ever seen that. I've seen kids'
No.
portions, which
That's not a
obviously,
reverse Freddo.
that's a reverse Freddo.
That's
It's like working for
shrinkflation.
you.
That is exactly what Freddo is. It is shrinkflation.
Yeah,
We're
but
going
it
around
was
the
like
circle. Can I say one too?
it was also 2/3 of the price.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
loved it.
Go on then, Carter.
Right. So my Freddo moment is
You're saying
right.
less.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoyed it. We've been the politics teacher and his students discussing Has the Tide Turned? The jury is out. Look forward to the next podcast.
R.I.P. Lib Dems.
Yeah, it's over.